Woodworking started with this, with making a cutting board. Maybe not all of woodworking. I don't think ancient cavemen were making charcuterie. Oh crap, that's where woodworking started, wasn't it? Hey everyone, before we get started today on this YouTube video and I show you the whole process of my cutting boards and wrangling my first YouTube video together and the experience that all of this was, I need to let you all know that this was shot at Makerworks and Arbor's Makerspace. And honestly, a wonderful organization. Part of the reason this is being shot is to promote them as I move forward with my making YouTube influencer career, whatever you want to have it. So I need to point you all towards the video description and say, hey, if you can help them out, or if you'd like to support me or Makerworks, the resources are down below for you. So let's talk about why we're really here. This thing. This is the thing, the bricks that have built the empire, per se. Okay, but let's talk process, because obviously these things don't just come together in a single day. They need time, they need love, they need patience. And the first way you get started with that is you have to start with raw lumber. You get raw lumber brought in, and you need to start the milling process. Get a board that has one straight or flat edge or a rough sawn side to it. You need to clean it up to run it through any of the tools, because running dimensionally inconsistent lumber through any tool is dangerous. So, start with the joiner. You run a flat face on it. The next step that you need to tackle is planing. You need to run it through the planer, and the planer is going to give you a clean face to work from, because you probably got all those little hairs on the lumber, you've got tear outs in the grain, you've got a bunch of stuff crazy going on, and you want to just make it nice and smooth. And you want to be consistent in its thickness. I mean, don't we all want to be consistent in our thickness? After you've just watched hundreds of board feet skid through a 20-inch wide planing machine, what are you doing with all of it after you've cleaned it up? Well, it's time for your favorite tool of any woodworker, anywhere. I'm sorry if you say otherwise, you're lying to yourself. The table saw. It's the one thing that every woodworker is accused of having an affair with. Planers have a little design flaw that can occur called snipe, and that's when a little end of the board gets scooped out and makes for a horrible glue joint. Now listen, people have yelled at me, they've said, just nip off the end on a miter saw. Well, no, because sometimes that snipe can be a couple inches of decently good wood. You're just gonna nip off the edge and call it a day? Why? Why would you ever do that? No. You don't waste anything, and you make sure that your joints on your woodworking, your glue joints, are tight. So what do? You obsess over jointing every last strip that you're going to use to make that glue up. and then subsequently pass out on the cart that you use to hold all of those strips. And then wish maybe that you didn't do that. Joiner, planer, table saw, joiner, drum sander. Drum sander? Well, wait, why are we drum sanding? We're drum sanding with an 80 or 120 grit belt. Now, this is something that I would do if given the time, every time, but sometimes you need to skip it. It's an optional step, but more or less, sanding the edges that are going to be glued with an 80 grit paper will end up creating grooves the glue can settle into and give you a tighter joint. Okay, so to run through this all over again. Joiner, planer, table saw, joiner, drum sander. Now, well, glue up. Duh. Glue up is basically a 10 to 15 minute, sometimes 30-minute panic attack of you doing everything in your power to get all of the gaps in your woodworking to close so that no one will ever know that that board slipped out of place and you were wrestling it like Thor wrestling the world serpent for a good 20 minutes before it finally got into place. And you spent the rest of the evening having a panic attack and or breakdown about, did that joint really close? Or am I going to go in tomorrow morning only to find out that what I thought was closed was actually a glue bead and an overhang of the boards? Trust me, I spend more time doubting myself as a woodworker than actually woodworking sometimes. Yeah, hi, welcome to my YouTube channel, where I'm hoping not to spread my insecurities to other people. We have fun here. Now, the shop bot. We at Makerworks love our shop bot. We have a Z plate that basically tells the machine where it is, and we set it and it's off to the races. We run a flattening bit over it and it just scans back and forth over the piece of wood to flatten it. And that's super useful because, again, like I just said, running anything with an inconsistent dimension across a woodworking tool can get it thrown back at you.
Oh, hey. Okay, cool. Editor Tom here. When I was in the shop, there were a couple things that I forgot to record. And I thought that maybe I should take a second to explain a couple of those concepts that I missed. So, firstly, the crosscuts. The crosscuts are super important. After I flatten the CNC blank and I take this big long piece off of the machine, I take it over to the saw stop table saw and use something called a crosscut sled. Now, basically all this does, as you see, is supports the piece at multiple points or across an entire length so that as I push it through the table saw blade and it performs that cutting action, it doesn't like fold or kind of pinch in on the blade. It's to prevent kickback, which is a concept that I've kept alluding to throughout the entirety of the video. Again, dimensional consistency, squareness, flatness, whatever you want to call it, is actually incredibly important to woodworking. All right. And then you're gonna see me make some adjustments, rotate it, and then push it through again because that's the rip cut. Now, in the rip cut, basically, just like we were doing with the strips, I'm making the board length consistent to then go back on the shop bot for a profile cut. All right, Editor Tom here again. I forgot something or didn't have an outline for what I wanted to say earlier. So, one of the things that I missed was talking about profile routes on the ShopBot. Side note, write a video outline next time instead of just a loose thing of what you need. Okay, one of the things that I missed talking about was the fact that I use a software called VCarve to make the profiles. Now, listen, there's going to be a whole nother video on a different thing I've made that we'll do some more footage about VCarve and talk a little bit more at length about it, so I want to save that for that video. But what's important to know is that after we made it dimensionally consistent and we've run it through a crosscut and a rip cut, the next step is to put the groove profile in the board using the ShopBot. I use a 3/4 bowl bit from Whiteside. So, now, that trade secret given away, are we good to get back to it? I think we're good to get back to editing and back to Shop Tom. I'm not certain. Let's see.
All right, so we use the 3/4 bowl bit set to the width of my hands and fingers. I do something really clever whenever I put these handles in, is that instead of measuring, I just do this, and I make sure the router table's unplugged, and I put my hand in between the bit and the clamp, and then I set the width that way. Why? Okay, I'm not bragging about anything, but I have decently sized hands, a little larger than average. I think they're larger than average. Set it to the width of my hand. Sometimes with or without the thumb, oftentimes with a little more breathing space, because if I'm above average in hand size, if I'm above average in hand size, well, what does that mean? It means that other people are going to find the board ergonomic. They can pick it up, it's comfortable for them, it makes sense, and maybe it's even spacious. So if I feel it's a decent measure, it must be pretty spacious for them. That makes some assumptions, but that's more for later. If you're chopping something and you're against the edge of the board, you don't want to be running into a sharp edge that isn't your knife. So you round it over. You use a router bit, you do all 8 edges on this thing. Yes, I count it, because there's 4 here and 4 on the top side. So you run this around the router table is what you do. Sometimes these boards, depending on my settings on the router, have a little lip along here. And so one of the things that I put in this video is the process of me removing that lip with a file. In woodworking, it can be either called a file, a shaper, or a rasp, R-A-S-P. And what a rasp does is just aggressively remove material, wood, from hard to reach places or places where there's no other shaping tool that will really cut the mustard per se. All right, cool. We have our groove in, we've softened our edge, we've made our handles, we've even flattened it. Well, now what? Sanding. That's the answer. It's sanding. We've routed the edges. The answer is sanding. We go through 120. We use a pneumatic sander. We go through 220, and if we're feeling super extra overachiever, we go for 320.
After sanding, it's time for the engraving step. which is one of the parts I'm particularly proud of because I get to put my logo on it. So, you're setting a focal length on the Makerworks' Epilogue lasers. Focal length just means, it's a fancy term for how far the lens is away from the surface of the material you're engraving. And that cuts in an awesome engraved little branding onto whatever it is. With some understanding of some graphic design and vector editing programs, can be as simple, plug and play, align, press go. These days, I don't use mineral oil anymore, but for this run of boards, I did. Normally my process involves putting them in a dunk tank, putting some oil over them, letting them soak for a few days, and then removing them and letting them sweat out whatever they can, and then they would be put into inventory after they were cleaned up. These days, I use a tung oil hard wax finish, and I'm kind of playing with those until I find the best solution. I found one I like, but it's a little pricier, and I think with a little finagling I can do better. But neither here nor there, these boards and the footage I have were done with mineral oil. One meant for rimming cocktail glasses, one meant for your everyday kitchen utility, and the other meant for those Sundays or holiday baking extravaganzas, whichever you'd like to partake in. Thanks for sticking around, and share it with your friends and family, because every new eyeball I reach is a chance to continue doing this. And I think I want to continue doing this. The woodworking, that is. The videos are a bonus. So, and I'm gonna get faster and better, and this is what my first track is like. All the links where you can find me are down below, from my Instagram and my TikTok to my Facebook to my web store to whatever else. And if you'd like to support me, there's Kofi, and if you'd like to support Makerworks, there's a link down there for their end of year giving campaign as well. So, thanks for tuning in. I'll see you all next time.